Today's video has 3 stories. We'll be starting things off with a story involving some college friends who come across something strange. Then I will be telling a story involving darkness therapy. This story is a little bit more of a psychological horror, but I found it interesting and scary in its own way nonetheless. And lastly, a possible ghost sighting. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. In college, I roomed with 4 other guys in a small house. It was a weekend in mid to late October of our junior year. Cal, the burnout of our group, had left early Friday afternoon to visit his girlfriend back home. 2 of my other roommates had also left after Friday classes for some reason or another. It was just me and Zach left at the house. Zach had been pestering me all afternoon to go to a party with him, but I was still suffering a hangover from the night before. Eventually he gave up, and I settled into a nice night nap. I was woken up by my phone buzzing against my face. Initially I just threw it on the ground, but it wouldn't stop buzzing. Someone needed to reach me. I shambled to my phone. The light was easy to find in the pitch black house. I had to focus my bleary eyes to make out the caller ID. It was Cal's cell. He never called me from out of town. My attention shifted to the time. It was around 2 a.m. Much later than I'd realized. A sudden pang of worry cut through my grogginess, and I fumbled around for a light switch. When I finally answered my phone, Cal responded by saying my name, as if he'd been surprised I was on the other end. His voice had an unfamiliar softness to it. I said something like, "Yeah, what's up?" Cal asked me if I could come pick him up. It wasn't softness I had heard in his voice. It was nerves. But I was as annoyed as I was anxious. So I bluntly asked if he'd gotten himself into some kind of car accident or something. "No," Cal replied. His car was apparently fine. I asked why he needed me to pick him up in the middle of the night then. No real answer. Only another plea that I come find him. I had been wanting to make a jab about him being drunk, but something kept stopping me. I'd seen Cal drunk or high hundreds of times before, and the voice over the phone seemed definitely sober. I reminded Cal that he was 4 hours away. Why couldn't his girlfriend or parents or older brother pick him up? He finally explained that he wasn't at home anymore, that he'd gotten on the road hours ago, and was in fact pretty close to our university. Then he mentioned something about being in a Denny's. His voice had started to shake. Gently I coaxed him into giving me more information about his exact location. It was a combination Denny's and a gas station off of the interstate Cal drove to get home and back. Fortunately, there was only one business within a 2-hour range that matched Cal's description. MapQuest estimated it was about an hour's drive, but I could swing it in 40 minutes. I told Cal I'd be there for him soon. It was difficult to get him to hang up. He made me promise I wouldn't just abandon him with that thing. That got my blood back running. I scribbled some notes for myself, then grabbed a jacket and a water bottle. Just as I was headed for the door, Zach came stumbling into the house. I was desperate for company after that phone call, so I told Zach he needed to get in the car. We were going somewhere. Luckily, Zach happened to be a very agreeable drunk. About 10 miles outside of town, the highway became more or less deserted. Zach was a bit of a closet nerd, so he was happily rambling about Star Wars or LOTR, or whatever it was he was into at that time. It was a comforting distraction from the fields of black that flanked the road. My stomach started to drop again, as the mile markers counted closer to our destination. I found the off-ramp with no problem, and as soon as I finished my turn, I could make out the bright red lettering of a Denny's sign in the distance. I circled around until I found Cal's car. In the splotchy lot lighting, I gave it a quick inspection. Cal had told me the truth. His car looked in the same semi-decent condition as usual. Zach was very excited we were going to a Denny's. When we went inside, there was no hostess at the front counter to show us to a table. Zach started strolling into one of the main dining areas, so I meekly followed behind him. There were maybe a few old men scattered around, but the place was close to empty. While I had been scanning the room for Cal, Zach had plopped himself into a booth and was hollering for the waitress. When she finally got over to us, she looked less annoyed than I'd expected. Before Zach could try to order, I cut in and asked if a guy about our age had been in the restaurant. The waitress nodded and said, "Yeah, your buddy's been waiting for you in the back." Then she gestured for us to follow her, as she showed us to the dining area on the opposite side of the front counter. The waitress pointed to a somewhat obscured booth in a corner. "He looked so shook up when he came in here," she said to us quietly. "I'm glad you boys showed up for him." She told us we were welcome to stay as long as we wanted, and to come find her if we needed anything. She wasn't exaggerating about Cal. When we walked up to him, he was ashen-faced and dead-eyed, staring down at a plate packed with food, but showing no desire to eat any of it. He didn't even notice us until Zach haphazardly smacked his arm by way of a hug. I'd figured he'd be excited I finally showed, but his voice was low and monotone as he greeted us and asked if we wanted to eat anything. The table was filled with food. There must have been 4 or 5 other dishes besides the one in front of Cal, as well as several beverage cups. I made a lame joke about him being jealous of one of our other roommates' beer guts. Cal just kinda halfway smiled at that, then explained he had to keep ordering stuff so he wouldn't feel bad about having sat in the restaurant for 3 hours. 3 hours? I'd asked with surprise. I'd made the trip out there in well under an hour. Cal shrugged and explained that he hadn't called me immediately. Apparently he was too freaked out. I asked what he meant by that. Cal didn't answer me right away. His eyes kept glazing over the ceiling. Finally they stopped to stare at Zach as he dipped a sausage link into a milkshake. He let out a genuine laugh, and we jointly started to rib Zach, who defended his unholy creation with, "You guys are so repressed. Sausage shake is delicious. Open your minds." With the tension broken, Cal started to tell his story. That evening, he was supposed to have dinner with his girlfriend at her parents'. They were meeting her parents at a fairly nice restaurant, and he and his girlfriend began to fight over the quality of his shoes. The fight snowballed from there, and a few hours later he was angry enough to drive all the way back home during the middle of the night. Our university was out in the sticks. The route you have to take between there and Cal's hometown is mostly 2-lane country highway. Cal was, as expected, speeding. It's a lonely stretch of road, and past 9 o'clock. Typically the only other vehicles you have to worry about sharing it with are semis. A single truck is simple enough to bypass, but God help you if you get stuck between 2 trying to pass each other. A turtle race, I think the slang goes. And that is exactly the situation Cal sped himself into. 2 semis had been driving bumper to bumper in the right-hand lane as Cal approached them on the left. He practically had to slam on his brakes when the trailing truck suddenly cut over into his lane in order to pass the first truck. Pissed off, Cal started to tailgate the semi in front of him as it hurriedly moved to pass the semi to the right. Personally, I try to never put myself and my car in this kind of position. I hate tight spaces, and it's horribly claustrophobic to be stuck between the edge of the road and 2 40-ton steel walls. Cal, however, has never been known for wisdom or prudence. While he was raging at the slow semi in front of him, he hadn't noticed another vehicle enter the highway. Suddenly there was an impatient SUV tailgating him. Cal was fully locked in between 3 cars. At this point, Cal explained, he started to get a real ominous feeling. It seemed like the truck in front of him was making no headway against the truck on the right. The SUV just kept getting closer and closer, until Cal swears it was within a foot of his own bumper. In response, Cal just kept getting closer to the rear of the semi, coming roughly within 10 feet. He said he was this close to just laying on the horn, when the SUV began to let up a bit. With thoroughly shot nerves, Cal said he tried to concentrate on what little road he had left in front of him. That's when he saw something move underneath the bed of the semi, It was only a brief shadow against the beams of his headlights, but the movement was sudden enough to startle Cal. He said at first he thought he was just being jumpy or succumbing to that trucker's fatigue, where they start seeing little gnomes by the sides of the road. The head that popped down iced both explanations. Cal almost swerved off the road. It had a humanoid face apparently, with maybe a toddler-sized head, leathery and hairless. Its mouth was gaping, but not as if to scream or bite or eat. Cal says that was the way it always sat. I asked him how he knew that. Because, he answered, I had to stare at that thing for 1,000,000 hours. In a literal sense, he was naturally exaggerating, but I can only imagine how time would have dragged on, trapped between an untimely death and that thing. Cal says after his initial shock, he was frozen in disbelief, losing all sense of time or place, just staring at the thing's shaded eye sockets. At last his trance was broken when the thing started forward, crawling upside down against the underbelly of the truck. As it moved closer, Cal could make out the gnarly limbs, heaving it along, which he described as like bat wings with no webbing. When it finally reached the end of the trailer bed, 3 long hooked digits curled around the underride bar. By then, Cal had broken down into full-blown hysteria. His foot hovered over the brake pedal, ready for a swift disengagement. Who cares about the consequences? He was this close on stomping down, as the thing pulled its head forward from underneath the underride bar, revealing its features in direct illumination. Its eyes were large and completely black, and Cal could see stubby, sporadic teeth within its hanging mouth. The thing then began wrapping its whole body around the underride bar, until it was suspended like a sloth. Once it had secured itself, it began slowly extending those hooked digits towards the hood of the car. Cal says it was never in range to reach him, but still, that was his breaking point. He freaked out, began wailing on the horn, flashing his brights, turning on his hazards. The SUV, he says, seemed to respond almost as if in panic, easing abruptly on Cal's tail. Within seconds, both cars were positioned safely behind the semis. It was just then that the semi Cal had been following finally passed the first and shifted over into the right lane. The SUV made quick work of passing Cal. He was glad to see it go. Alone on the road again, he pulled off to the shoulder to finish hyperventilating in peace. As Cal finished, I was at a loss for what to say. He seemed so shaken and spoke in such uncharacteristic earnest. I was inclined to believe him, but the whole thing sounded so bizarre. Fortunately, Zach cut in with, "Man, that's messed up." Cal laughed, somewhat feigned, and replied, "Yeah, it was." I could put together the rest of Cal's ordeal on my own. Still stricken, he must have gotten off on the first exit he came across, then pulled into the first restaurant he saw. He waited it out for a couple hours, realized he was too terrified to drive, then called me to pick him up. Whether the thing was real or not, my friend's fear certainly was, and I was eager to get him home. The problem was that we had 2 cars and only 1 driver. I certainly wasn't going to let Zach behind the wheel until at least another 6 hours and a decent nap. Cal balked when I suggested we'd have to leave his car in the Denny's parking lot until the next afternoon. Too tired to get irritated, I grabbed hold of the first idea that came to me and went with it. Out in the filling station portion, I tepidly approached an elderly couple in a busted-looking Chevy. I asked which direction they were headed. Same direction as our university. It worked out. I gave a bare-bones rundown of our predicament, glazing over Cal's demon sighting with, "Had a bad incident." Then offered them $200, I didn't have, for one of them to drive Cal's car back to our house. They exchanged a look, then the husband offered to commander the car for free, as I had hoped. The whole operation was risky and honestly pretty stupid, but it worked. The old man followed us in Cal's car, no funny business, and his wife in turn trailed him in their Chevy. He neatly parked the car in the spot next to mine, and I approached him as Zach shouted out his gratitude from our doorway. I was about to start in on another round of profusely thanking him, when he waved his hand and said there was no need. Feeling at ease again, I tried to strike up some small talk before I just up and left the old man. I found out that he and his wife were retired, and that they shared a lifelong love of road trips. At the time, they were traversing the entire continental USA, from sea to shining sea. The conversation trailed off, and I took Cal's keys and turned to leave. Then the man started to speak again. He asked about Cal, or as he put it, your friend who was all shook up. He wanted to make sure he was okay. I'm sure he'll be fine, I answered. Good, good. It's always a trip. The first time you see one of them. Conventional therapy is pointless for me. I think it's because of the way therapy works. The therapist is supposed to pinpoint something that you're not seeing, that is causing your thinking and emotions negatively so you can address it. It's essential that the therapist is asking the right questions, of course. You could see a therapist for many reasons, as long as you go to them with an open mind, and the slightest clue of what's been bothering you. This method never worked for me. I had not the slightest idea of what was amiss. I just sat there talking to myself while the therapist was probably practicing her best improv drawing of me. I struggle with being underjoyed. Not exactly depressed, just not happy. Is there a purpose for this life? I grew up with a religious family. I was told that the reason for living is to be the most like a saint you possibly can. You are not promised happiness here on earth, but of storing up gifts in heaven. You live a life that is according to God's plan, and when you die you either get a high five or you receive a slap on the wrist. For what? Not understanding where you went astray. Did you take a wrong turn at a fork in the road? Maybe you picked the rusty fork up and chose to go your own way. I discovered that people in Thailand do something called darkroom enlightenment. Extended amounts of time spent in the dark stimulates the pineal gland. It's an ancient practice where a person secludes themselves in a completely pitch dark room for up to 14 days with limited food and water. Just enough for survival. You could fast from food if you wanted to make the experience even more extreme. It's known that it releases DMT in the brain, which causes altered consciousness, which creates feelings of internal oneness. The human body only releases DMT typically the minute you're born, and the minute you take your last breath. There is also a link between darkroom therapy and tribes in the Amazon. They believe it connects their souls to a spirit realm, a waking consciousness. It can help people suffering from a psychological disorder. After I decided to do it, I looked for places that even still provided that sort of thing anymore. No rooms in my house would work for it. I found this wellness spa. They offer things like hypnosis for quitting smoking, and pain management with things like acupuncture and all alternate healing. The website said, "Please apply in person for interest in our darkroom." I parked outside contemplating if I was really about to do this. I stared at the building for about 15 minutes before I turned the car off and got out. I walked in and walked up to the desk. The lady seemed nice, almost too nice. In a high-pitched voice, "Name, please." "I have no appointment. I was interested in using your darkness room. Your website says to apply in person." Her facial expressions went bleak. "Oh, okay then. Sign this form here, here, and here. Somebody will be right with you." I thanked her after signing, then sat down in the waiting area. I grabbed a magazine off from the table. 10 Ways to Transform Your Life. Really? I said out loud. A lady that was waiting a few seats over gave me the dirtiest look I have ever received. She had a white robe on, and in the pockets I could read the name of the center. Serenity Wellness Spa. "Sorry," I whispered. The door opened. A woman stepped out and stated my name. "This way, please." She was wearing scrubs like a nurse. Her hair was combed back tightly in a bun. As we were walking down the hallway, she told me that not a lot of people inquire about it anymore. Most people think it's still kind of taboo. "I have done it, and it is quite an experience," she told me. "Have you ever indulged in any drugs before? Ecstasy, Molly? It could hinder how well this will work for you. How about taking any medications?" she asked. I looked at her and said that I never have. I was lying, of course. "You can tell me. It's all confidential here, she said. I assured her I haven't. At the end of the hall there were double doors. She used her elbows and pushed all her weight into them. You sure you are going to be able to get me? She laughed nervously. Of course. It just needs the hinges adjusted, she said. She showed me the room I would be staying in for days. It was about 10 foot long by 10 foot wide. It was empty except for a few boxes of crackers and bottled water. What's with the padding? Do I get a complimentary straitjacket too? She rolled her eyes at me. No, that's for your safety. Just precaution. Okay then, I said. She handed me a robe, the same kind the hostile woman was wearing in the lobby. Put this on. You're all set to get started. Just knock when you're all done getting undressed and are wearing the robe. When you want someone to come get you, please press this button here, and the door will open for you, and one of our staff members will get notified. I knocked and sat down in the middle of the room. Then the lights went on above me. I was in complete darkness. The first few hours I was bored. I wanted to be at home on my couch binge watching Netflix. Then I remembered all the positive effects this could have on me. For once I was determined to pull through with something. The darkness around me started to feel like a heavy blanket around my shoulders. I had no real sense of time. Feeling aware of my body breathing gave me anxiety. I had to distract myself from thinking about it. The floor felt cold against my cheek. I pushed myself to a sitting position. I forgot where I was for a minute. I must have fallen asleep. I got up carefully onto my feet. When I knew I was standing, I put my hands out to feel around for a wall. I started to count as I took steps forward. 1, 2, 3. I said under my breath, 4. Someone whispered into my ear. I lost my equilibrium and fell onto my back. Hello? Nobody answered me. I shrugged it off as a completely normal incident, considering the circumstances. I closed my eyes, or I think I did. The room was a black void. At one point I could see a light. Where was it coming from? Was it really there? How could there be light? Crawling on my hands and knees, I scurried towards it. I felt the padding under my fingers as I went. A wind blew through my hair. I felt like I was crawling forever. I looked at my hands, except my hands didn't seem like hands anymore. I saw 10 towering trees and rivers, with streams split off from each other, getting wider and wider. I was staring down as if I was a bird up in the sky. I dove down closer. I observed a massive hole in the land that pulsated to an unknown vibration. I could not move my gaze from the hole in the ground. Its shape kept shifting like looking into a kaleidoscope. The opening on the ground unveiled its final form. I saw a girl's face. Features angular but feminine. Her eyes opened into purple stones. They cracked and disintegrated into black sand. Then I was falling into the unknown with nothing to grasp. Particles showered down around me. After a few seconds, I realized I was not falling at all. I was still on my hands and knees. I was feeling fingers tightly around my ankle bones. I yelled out for them to let go. I kicked my feet towards where I thought they would be, without looking. The glass shattered to the floor. Looking at her, there was no feeling of trepidation. The essence she produced was more of a reflection of how I have been feeling all of my life. Listlessness. You're just a manifestation of my unhappiness. You can't hurt me. You're part of me. Her expression was unchanged. I remembered a Bible verse that has always stuck with me. I just never understood it until that moment. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places seeking rest, and he does not find it. I just stared at her only a few seconds, and eternity all at the same time. The door to the hallway opened. The light that came through was blinding, almost ironic in a way that nearly all encounters with a deity end with a bright light. The experience was utterly spiritual. Miss Antonella? She asked into the room. How long have I been in here? I asked her. Long enough, about 6 days, she replied. That was not possible, I thought. After everything, I was ready to go. Now that the room was visible, I saw that nothing changed except a few bottles of water that were now empty. My stomach ached as I walked towards the door. How was it? Do you feel any better? I'm sure I will feel much better when I stop at the nearest gas station to grab a bite to eat. When I got home, I swear I slept for 16 hours straight. After I woke up, I ran to the bathroom. Sitting on the toilet, I found myself looking at the tiles on the walls. At first, I thought it was my neighbors in the apartment next door, but the banging sound would have come from my living room. Then the tiles began to fall off the wall as pieces of cement were crumbling to the ground. It suddenly ceased, and the walls were entirely untouched as they were before. The week following the therapy, not only did I begin seeing things that were not there, but I also started feeling depressed. I mean, extremely sad. I didn't want to eat. Falling asleep was nearly impossible. I felt terrible. Turning to the internet for help, I jotted down a number for a nearby shaman. We decided to meet in person. I told him what I did and what's been happening to me. You killed it, right? Many people have a hard time doing that at the end of the session. It's the part that delivers you. Kill her? What do you mean? I asked. When your negativity leaves you and manifests outside your body, you are supposed to kill it. I had no option to. She never came out of the mirror, and I never felt threatened by her. That is very odd. Well, I don't know if this is important or not, but I sort of lied about not taking any medication. What type of medication? He asked, looking worried. An antidepressant. This was a serious mistake on your part. You are not feeling everything you needed to feel to know that you must kill it. Matthew 12:45. Then goeth he, and taketh with it 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. I stopped taking my medication by dumping the entire bottle down the sink. She was occupying the corner again last night. I sat up in bed and turned on the light. She was staring at me with her inanimate expression. I grabbed for the pocket knife in the drawer. My hand found the knife. She turned her head slowly towards me. Her facial expressions began to change into a state of ferocity. I let go of the blade, and she looked threatening again. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to try to kill her. What if it's only possible to do it during the darkness therapy? I guess I am going back to try again. I wonder if there will be more than one this time. It was the start of summer break from college, but sadly for Lucas, one of my suite mates, he got a conditional grade for our physics class. He had to stay for a few more days to review for the removals exam. He was the only one left in our suite while the rest of us, his 3 suite mates, were either already going to our respective hometowns or having a vacation elsewhere. The day I was packing my stuff, I saw his room door open and joked to him, "Dude, just ditch the exam and retake the class next term." "No thanks. I better finish this subject this term or my mom will kill me. It's just almost a week of sacrifice anyway." He replied while slightly smiling and doing some equations. "I was just kidding anyway, man. I'll leave this afternoon. As you know, Tom and Dawn left already this morning, so that would mean after me leaving it will just be you in here." "Yeah, I know. No need to remind me of my loneliness." "Okay, I'll just pack some more stuff, surrender my keys to the admin, and I'll be ready to go." Our residence hall isn't on campus, and every end of the term, we have to leave the rooms clean and empty. For each floor, there are 4 suites. Each suite has 4 rooms. 1 comfort room with 3 cubicles, and a common room, or a small lounge, all shared by 4 students. "Yeah, man, just tap me before leaving so I'll know," he said with his eyes still focused on his reviewer. After almost an hour of more packing and cleaning my room, I surrendered my keys. Dragging my luggage bag, I dropped by Lucas's room and said my goodbye. He stood up from his studying and gave me a brotherly hug. We said see you in July, while patting one another's backs. After his removals, he called me to tell me a creepy story he said he would never forget. It happened the night after I left our suite. It was just his 2nd day of studying for the exam, but he's pulling an all-nighter already. He was that serious in making sure not to fail it. It was around 3 a.m., and he was half asleep when he heard an eerie laughing of a man coming from outside his window. It grew louder and louder every second. The default setup of the rooms in our suites is that the bed is placed on the farthest corner of the room, the cabinet near the door, and the study table facing the window, for natural light is good for studying, they said. Unless, of course, the resident chooses to change it. In Lucas's case, he chose to not move a thing. He just added some things like a smaller cabinet, a laundry basket, a cork board, and a couple of succulent plants from the farming club he's in. Back to the laughing he was hearing. It made him pause from studying, and he stood up close to his window. As when he was about to hold the handle, a middle-aged man, around 40, stopped him. "Hello there," the man said with an unsettling grin on his face, and still laughing almost uncontrollably, as if it's not 3 in the morning. "Hi?" Lucas replied with a concealed terror. "I'm closing my window because it's becoming chilly. Can I help you?" The man looked at my friend's desk. "Oh, I see that you're still studying. For an exam, perhaps?" "Yeah, but I'm calling it a night and I should get some rest." Giving a shooing message to the creepy man. "Oh yeah, I'm not gonna hold ya. I'm just walking around because I find things funnier in the depth of the night. Anyway, I have some reminder for a young man like you. Don't overwork nor overstudy just for an exam. I don't mean high grades are bad, but make sure you still take care of yourself." The man's advice was indeed true. At least I think so. "Yeah, I'm just trying not to fail a subject that I find really hard. But yeah, I agree with what you said." Lucas responded and found the courage to grip the window handle again. Even then, it's in front of the creepy dude's grinning face. "Alright then, I shall see you around," was the man's last words according to Lucas, before he went back to laughing loudly. He could hear the laugh fading away when Lucas realized something that sent a chill up his spine. Our suite was on the residential hall's 9th floor, and there was no way a man could simply pass by his room window. I don't know how Lucas dealt with it upon realizing that horrifying situation. He just told me that he couldn't sleep and study for the rest of the night, and did most of his studying during daytime in the library afterwards. He also reported the incident to the admin, but that didn't help him much. Well, he did pass his exam. Lucas was able to convince Tom to swap rooms the following term, without telling him what he experienced in it.